Thank you all for joining us for today's Cloud Computing Webcast.
Welcome to the Neudesic webcast.
Hi, everybody. Cloud Computing Webcast, the right way to evaluate and adopt the cloud, presented by David Pallman. My name is Meredith Mead, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by David Pallman, Neudesic's General Manager of the Custom Application Development Practice. We are very excited to have him present for us this morning. Today's webcast is a part of our Cloud Computing series. We'll be hosting our next webcast, determining TCO and ROI, on November 16th. We'll be sending out more information about this webcast, along with today's webcast recording. If you're all logged on, you should be able to see the title slide that states Microsoft Cloud Computing Assessments Part 1. There was a brief intro earlier regarding features within Live Meeting. To briefly recap, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the scene chart feature within Live Meeting. Changing your feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select your feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you when the link is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green. At this time, I'd like to turn our presentation over to David. David? One moment, please. I think we may be having troubles with audio. I'm very sorry about that.
Meredith, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, David. David?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you say there was an audio problem?
Yes, but it seems that we can hear you now, so I think it's okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Alrighty. Sorry about that, folks. So we're here to talk about cloud computing assessments. You might be wondering what's the right way, the safe way, the responsible way to get onto cloud computing. And really there is a rhythm that works best, and it's the one that you see here. Clients start out in an awareness phase where they are moving from a point of knowing nothing about cloud computing to starting to learn about it. So from different corners of the universe, they're getting information about the cloud. They're getting information, partial information, misinformation in some cases. And it comes through a variety of venues, everything from what you read, discussions of peers and colleagues, to past presentations by different vendors and such. How do you get from that first stage to the final stage, which is you've adopted the cloud and are glad that you did so? Well, it's really these inner two activities that play an important role there in giving you clarity and insight. One is a cloud computing assessment, which we're talking about today. The other is to do some sort of experiment or proof of concept in the cloud, something low cost and low risk, because there's no substitute for the personal experience of doing something in the cloud. And those two together will give you a lot of confidence that you have made the right plans for cloud computing and can adopt it with confidence. So the value of a cloud computing assessment, very simply, is to take this general value proposition of the cloud, this general notion you're hearing about the benefits, and turn it into something that's focused for your company. What would the cloud mean specifically for your organization if you adopted it? The other important thing to know about cloud computing assessments is that they're generally free, and so there's only no reason not to take advantage of one. It'll give you a lot of insight into what the cloud could mean for you, and you'll be able to make good plans from that. Some of the questions that we answer in a cloud computing assessment are, can I believe the claims of cloud computing? What is Microsoft doing in the cloud? What are the benefits? How do I avoid risk? Is the cloud a good fit for my business? Cost. What is my return on investment on moving to the cloud? What are the best opportunities? What belongs in the cloud and what doesn't belong in the cloud? And when is the right time to engage? These are all common questions, and the assessment will help you find answers to them. One of the things we do in the cloud computing assessment is envisioning. That's where we sit down with your business people and your technical people and have envisioning sessions where we perhaps send out a pre-survey, but we really get together ultimately as a group and have a big discussion, first of all, about what's going on in the company, what's going on with the company culture, what business initiatives and IT initiatives are on the calendar already that we should understand so we have context into where your organization is headed. But we will talk about the benefits and the values and find of the general value propositions in the cloud, find the ones that resonate with your company. And we don't want to talk about benefits, we also want to have a pretty frank discussion about risks and concerns and let you understand how they can be addressed to your satisfaction. And also in all of this, we're looking for the potential opportunities to explore. Different applications that you run in your organization, which ones look like they would make sense in the cloud and are worthy of further, deeper study. One of the things we'll do with opportunities is profile them. So we'll develop an application inventory for you, and there we will study applications from a lot of different perspectives. The business value, the technical profile, what it's made of, what technologies it uses, what the environment is that it executes in. We'll look at the usage profile of your application. Is it kind of flat? Is it seasonal? Is it choppy in its use? We will do a total cost of ownership analysis, and we will compare on-premise costs to what's in the cloud. We'll estimate, at least provisionally, a migration of existing applications into the cloud. We will give you an ROI analysis so you can make the business case. And we'll also give you an overall scoring of suitability that looks not only at the financials but other technical metrics. In the migration estimate, we will map your existing application architecture and the technologies they use over to the Microsoft Cloud Platform and see that it all makes sense. Scope the level of effort, we will look at what's involved in migrating the code, the data, the security requirements, and any integration you might have to existing systems, as well as what needs to happen for operations to be able to monitor your application in the cloud. For that, we can put together a high-level estimate, which helps you figure out the ROI. Does it make sense to go into the cloud or not? In our ROI analysis, we will look at the TCO on-premise and compare it to the TCO in the cloud. And there are a variety of ways we can calculate that. But if we're able to come up with numbers, we'll look at the differential, which typically is the savings, and that will give you a good feeling for your month-to-month savings. We can then look at the transition from your on-premise month-to-month saving, the cost rather, to the in-cloud, and also the migration, the cost of getting there. We can look at month-to-month, but even more interesting is to look at it over the lifetime of the application. If you know the application is going to be around a certain number of years, we can look at the savings year over year. The first year will have a dent in it because of the migration, but after that, savings continue. And so the longer the app lifetime expected, the more savings you'll realize. We'll also score for suitability by looking at not only savings, but many other factors, such as how easy it is to move the code and data, alignment of the platform, various barriers, how deeply integrated the application is of the systems, and so on. And these last two things, ROI and technical suitability, we're going to focus on in Part 2 and Part 3 of this webcast series. You see the applications have different shapes, and there's an ideal shape. And so with suitability, it's easy to take a lot of factors into account, and yet we have a good way of showing visually to both technical and non-technical people how suitable one app is over another. We also take your applications and give you a logical roadmap and timeline for them based on what you told us about what's going on with the business and IT, and based on the suitability and value to be seen from moving different apps in the cloud. We can plot them on a Gartner-style Magic Quadrant analysis, and we can align things on the calendar with your business and IT initiatives. The process we use for assessment is what we call the one-on-one core team approach. And the other consultant will team up with one company insider from your business, and together they will plan the assessment and then conduct it. Planning the assessment, they'll send out a pre-survey, they'll figure out who the participants are, what the sessions should be, and then on the day of the assessment, we'll meet with various people for various reasons and start off by asking a lot of questions, but by the end of the day, telling a lot in terms of prescriptive advice on strategy that makes sense for the cloud, and opportunities that seem to be most likely to bring value with least amount of trouble. Typical schedule for a one-day, we call a broad assessment. And a broad assessment, we are coming in and focusing mostly on strategy and surveying the portfolio of IT applications you have. So you'll see that we will typically have one or more envisioning sessions. Sometimes it's useful to have a separate envisioning session with the business folks and the technical folks because we'll get different opinions. We'll then profile your applications. And again, if you have a lot of applications, we might take quite a bit larger chunk of time to do that. In some cases, maybe even several days or a week or two. And we will, after profiling your applications, make the business case for them and look at their suitability. Based on everything we've heard, we'll suggest a strategy for use of the cloud, summarize that, and present findings. And so it's a pretty streamlined process, and it yields a lot of interesting information. We have an online tool that we use to plan our own assessment, and it's a website you can go to. It's cloud-assessment.com. Feel free to visit. And that's where you can also download a brochure and sign up for an assessment if you're interested. And I'll be taking you through that momentarily. Ultimately, you'll get a PDF report of everything I've just shown you, and that'll include the capture of the survey and envisioning, risk-reward analysis, and inventory of your opportunities, that is, say, applications, including ROI and suitability scoring, proposed cloud computing strategy, and a roadmap. Really, the deliverable is not so much the PDF as it is the clarity that the activity gives you and the plan that results from it. So we are going to now go into a sample assessment and walk through it using our assessment tool. Here at my browser full screen mode, I'm here at cloud-assessment.com. With a sample assessment. Okay. So we do an assessment is we first of all figure out what we're going to be doing. There are a lot of potential activities. You don't necessarily do all of them in every assessment. And so the consultant and your company insider will have a planning meeting where they'll go through the checklist of planned activities, and as they actually get performed, they'll get checked off. So those activities can include envisioning, and can include identifying opportunities, profiling applications, financial technical analysis, perhaps an architectural design session on an opportunity that looks promising, security design session, looking at your cloud strategy, giving your roadmap, creating a final report, and presenting findings are all things that will typically fall into an assessment. We will capture some company information. Who are the participants and what are their roles? For example, who's a business decision maker, who's a technical decision maker. We'll ask the questions about your company culture. For example, using Gartner's definitions, some companies are aggressive innovators. They are willing to tolerate a certain amount of risk after reward, and they're good at managing risk. There's the risk-averse follower that really can't tolerate much of any risk. And then kind of in the middle there, it's a pragmatic adopter that looks at risk and reward equally. So knowing those types of questions helps us tailor our activities and recommendations accordingly. Also, who evaluates new technology in the company? Sometimes it's IT, but not always. Sometimes it's individual departments. Sometimes the company will put together a special task force. And then the cloud brings along with it an interesting idea that companies have a range of reaction to, the idea of the democratization of IT, which is to say that some of IT can become more self-serve and more broadly done outside of IT. That can get rid of some bottlenecks. Some companies think that's a great idea and really support it. Some are against it, frankly, and some are open to it but want to know more about it. So these types of questions and more that go in our survey to make sure we understand where your company is coming from and how it operates, and anything we recommend would be a good fit for that. We will together plan a schedule. Again, that might be one day, but it might be many days. It depends on the scope of what needs to be done there. These assessments really run in two flavors. There's the target assessment and the broad assessment. In the broad assessment, we're coming in and we're really talking a lot about strategy, and we're surveying that entire portfolio of IT assets and looking for good fits, scenarios that make sense to the cloud. In a targeted assessment, a lot of times a company, maybe just one group or division of a company, will have an app in mind already, and you really just want to focus on that one app. And we call that a targeted assessment. In that case, we will scale back our focus, not to worry as much about overall strategy and such, and really go deeper into that one application. And perhaps that might lead directly into an architectural design session and even a pilot if things look right. So different sizes and different focuses, but we'll plan this schedule tailored to your needs. On the actual data assessment, one of the first activities we'll do is called envisioning. In envisioning, we're going to run different parts of the cloud value proposition by you, engage your reaction, and find out what resonates. The cloud is such a strong and good story, both technically and business-wise, that we find that different parts of it appeal to different companies. And so it might be one company that's really all about the reduced cost, but another company might be all over the flexibility and the fast time to market. And so it's useful for us to learn and capture that because it helps us know what to focus on to demonstrate value and suitability to you. So typically in the envisioning session, we'll start with some education and explain what these different points are. So I'm going to go now to a short slide deck and do just that. I'm going to give you a brief cloud introduction and cover these points that we're going to ask about. Okay, so one of the first things we'll ask when we're there in a group setting is before the Neudesic consultant takes you with any information, we'll actually just go around and ask your impressions of the cloud. And that's important because people often have preconceived notions. They've heard things, they will pro cloud for certain reasons, and maybe some people already think they have applications in mind for the cloud. Other people may be worried about the cloud or have some negative feeling about it. Some people just won't know. But it's very useful to go around with the group and find it out. And typically you're going to hear a mix of things like this. People are going to be unsure, is the cloud really an opportunity, or maybe there's a lot of hype involved? Is getting into the cloud hard, or is it easy? Is there a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there, or are we looking at a lot of risk, or maybe some of each? And ultimately, if I go through that door to the cloud, is that going to take me to a heavenly place, or some place that I'd really rather not be? These are all common notions that have swirling in the room when you do the visioning session, and the thing to do is really to make it clear to people what the story is, so that they leave. They may enter with some confusion, but we want them to leave with very clear clarity about what's possible and what's real. Talking about cloud computing generally, we'll often make the analogy to electricity. I'll often ask, for example, I'm doing one of these myself, how many of you own a home generator, and see if anybody raises their hands, and whether anybody does or not, it's a given that we all plug into the wall, the outlet on the wall on a given base for electricity. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of good reasons for it. It's easy, it's available, these outlets are everywhere. And you can draw as much or little electricity as you want. It's all the capacity you could want to tap there. So if I use 10 times as much electricity this month as compared to last month, I don't have to renegotiate the contract. I just use it and I just get a bigger bill. Likewise, if I use less next month, I'll get a smaller bill. I only pay for what I use. I only use what I need. So there are lots of good things about the electricity analogy. It holds up pretty strongly with cloud computing. So in other words, this is exactly where computing is going, and we help people understand. They already understand the idea of utilities pretty well, and so they already understand quite a bit about cloud computing, more perhaps than they realized. We'll talk about challenges facing today's enterprise to find out if any of these are true of your organization. Imperative to reduce costs and control costs. Directive to do more with less and use what you already have. A lot of companies are up against data center planning. There are data centers in near capacity. They've got to make plans for the next couple of years. Not quite sure how new technologies should enter into that picture. There's a wish to better match capacity and demand, but it's always been hard to take out that crystal ball and figure out what the future holds, and in these uncertain times even more so. Despite all of the above, IT is often expected to still provide full services, even expanding services, perhaps supporting greater accessibility, such as support for suitability, and yet maintain security. And of course, you want your company to still be able to innovate. You want to be able to leverage new technologies to help, but you've also got to be really careful at managing your costs and your risks. And typically, a company will relate to at least one of these, if not all of these tensions. The good news is the cloud can help you in every one of these areas. So what are some of the benefits of cloud computing? Well, no upfront hardware purchases. So you just pay as you go. You don't have to do this projection of what your peak capacity is going to be. Hope you buy enough servers and get it right, and then every 18 months upgrade those servers and all that. That's just handled for you. Secondly, lower costs and use of shared resources. That's within the utility. The use of shared resources brings your costs down. Of course, you need to be comfortable that that's done in a secure and safe way. Fast time to market, so lightning fast provisioning and deployment. So, for example, in the case of the Windows Azure platform, you can deploy to the cloud in 15 to 20 minutes, and that's a lot better than 6 weeks to 6 months, whatever your normal procurement cycle is. And so it's really a whole new world of being able to quickly deploy applications and upgrades. And then the scale and the elasticity. The cloud can go as big as you need it to be, and it's elastic. Think of it as a big rubber band, and so you can go larger, smaller anytime you want to. So you can do that through a web portal. It only takes a few minutes. So from a cost benefit standpoint, it's really useful to do this comparison about how we pay for things and adjust scale in the enterprise as compared to in the cloud. So the wavy line here is a hypothetical example of low demand for your application over time. It goes up steeply, it crests, it goes down for some reason, expected or unexpected, it goes back up. And the staircase there is the vertical part of the staircase where it goes up is you're spending money on servers and other infrastructure, and as the time goes by, and then you've got to buy more. Why? Well, you think you see demand going up, or you think if your fear it might go up, and you're always going to have that extra capacity to handle it. And even in the best of situations, occasionally you might be caught unawares where you don't have enough capacity, and then you can't supply all of your users, and that's bad. And so. In the typical case where you have more than you need, you're spending more money than you need to, or you're spending it earlier than you need to, just on the safe side. And again, we don't always get that right. So this is completely what we're used to, but it is not ideal. How does this compare to the cloud? Let's look at the exact same hypothetical load in the cloud. And what we'll do in the cloud is simply watch what's going on and dial the cloud closer to match. If you see demand go up, we make the cloud bigger. If you see it go down, we make the cloud smaller. And anybody can see how much more efficient it is. You're never wasting an IT dollar. Really, you're never wasting an IT penny. So in the cloud, we have 3 big categories of services. There's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Infrastructure as a service really is virtualized raw hardware. So, for example, I just want a server, or I just want a storage unit. Platform as a service, a little more sophisticated. This is the ability to run your applications on a platform such as Windows Server, .NET Framework. And software as a service is running somebody else's packaged apps at a per user per month cost typically. For example, something like a CRM package. What are some of the strong scenarios for running apps in the cloud? When we look for opportunities, some of the things we would consider are as good fits would be applications with a changing load. I'll have more to say about that on the next slide. Burst computing. So some industries actually have burst computing. I think of actuarial analysis and insurance, or life sciences, processing the human genome, or perhaps film animation rendering. But what's interesting about the cloud is it can bring burst computing to you as a possible new style of computing that you might want to use electively. For example, let's say you have a long-running application that you run at the end of every month or every quarter, and perhaps it's very important. It's very important information that people are hungry for, but it takes a while to run. Let's say, for argument's sake, it takes 24 hours on a server for this periodic long-running application to run. Well, if your app is designed the right way, you could just lease 24 servers in the cloud and run that app in 1 hour instead of 24, and then release all of the assets in the cloud when you're done with them. So the cloud enables some new styles of computing, like burst computing. Another category would be applications that need to scale fast or fail fast. That's really the entrepreneurial scenario, such as for a startup. In that case, imagine that you've got something experimental, you hope it's going to be successful, but you don't really know how successful it's going to be. You put your app in the cloud, and if it's moderately successful, you have a moderate bill. If it's really successful, you have a bigger bill, but you're making money on your initiative. If it's massively successful, then the cloud can handle that too. You'll have a much bigger bill, but you'll again be making money. Well, we hope it's successful, but maybe you need to pull the plug. The good thing about the cloud is it's easy in and easy out. You can pull the plug anytime you want to. You won't have any financial or legal obligation beyond the current month's bill. And so the app is this great environment for experimentation because you can stay in as long as you want and as big as you want, but you can walk away anytime. Similarly, any kind of application with uncertain lifetime, such as, say, a hurricane relief fund site, would be good for the cloud. The cloud's an interesting technology in that the less certainty you have about things like load or lifetime, the better the cloud story is for you because it's so flexible. Any kind of applications that are web-oriented make a lot of sense in the cloud. For example, anything in your DMZ or perimeter network that's public-facing just makes a lot. It's low-hanging fruit to put in the cloud. You've already asked the questions about security and such if you have a public-facing site, and so putting it into the cloud is a slam dunk typically, and often that's what people will do first. However, I also want to point out the business-to-business applications and internal applications are also very good fits for the cloud. In particular, the cloud has communication and security federation features that are really very well tuned to the business scenario. And so if you do any kind of electronic integration with customers or suppliers or your value chain, you should look at the cloud's capabilities there for federation. Some people look at the cloud for data center extension. Maybe perhaps the data center is getting full and you want to look at going larger. And actually, a lot of people now, the modern data center is moving away from this idea that it has to be large enough to handle your peak load, and that you can design the data center to handle your average load and use the cloud for overflow if you design your applications that way. Some folks use the cloud as disaster recovery or overflow for the main data center. And then lastly, you might be interested in that SaaS model yourself, software as a service. Perhaps you have corporate clients right now that you have to separately provision. And the idea of taking one application and running it in one deployed form in the cloud that all of your corporate clients can access, but what we call where you keep everybody's data and accounts very isolated from each other. Maybe that's attractive for you, and the best way to run SaaS system in the cloud. I mentioned load earlier, so if your application is growing or declining, or perhaps seasonal, where you have more computing need one part of the year than the rest, or unpredictable, or burst computing based, all of those are strong arguments to the cloud for the financial argument I gave earlier with the staircase pattern. That doesn't mean they flat and changing load doesn't mean it's a bad fit for the cloud, but it means we need to look at other things. But 5 times out of 6, the usage profile alone of your application can make a strong case for the cloud being a financial gain for you. What does Microsoft do in cloud computing? Well, you may be wondering what's the difference between how Microsoft does cloud computing and other vendors. Really, to me, the key is this. Microsoft philosophy, which is called software and services, or S&S, is simply this. Microsoft, over the years, has given us many products and technologies in the enterprise. And none of that is going away. Instead, Microsoft is bringing alongside that cloud equivalents. So we've had Exchange, for example, for email. Now we have Exchange Online in the cloud. We've had Dynamics CRM, and now we have CRM Online in the cloud. SharePoint Online. SQL Server, SQL Azure. Windows Server, Windows Azure. And you'll just see more and more of this. And so really the philosophy here is that Microsoft realizes that the answer to the question, what belongs in the cloud and what belongs on premise, that question has a different answer for every organization. So Microsoft respects your right to control the split and to change it over time, and is committed to giving you strong and ongoing enterprise and cloud software solutions that let you choose the right place for your different applications. So to start it up then, what Microsoft's cloud computing lets you do is all three of those areas looked at earlier: SaaS, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. On the software as a service side, there are two big offerings. One is called BPOS, the Business Productivity Online Suite, and that includes in a bundle per user per month Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Office Communicator, and Live Meeting, and also the Microsoft Dynamics CRM Online. So again, these are packaged products that you can use in a cloud subscription basis. For your own applications, there is the Windows Azure platform, which will give you both platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. And on the platform as a service side, you have hosting support, database and non-database storage, and communication and security capabilities. Very extensive. So many different types of your applications can live in the cloud. And that includes, again, both public-facing applications as well as B2B or internal applications. For making the cloud work are the data centers behind it. The Microsoft data centers are pretty fantastic. Definitely not your father's data center. You see this container or pod in the lower left. Companies like HP and Dell supply those. They can hold thousands or even tens of thousands of servers. They have just 3 hookups for data, coolant, and power. And they're on air brakes. 4 people can move them. And they arrive on boxcars or in backs of trucks. And this is the unit of management in the cloud data center. If 20% of one of those computers fail, then the pins get moved over and it gets pulled. These data centers are also very green. Sometimes they put the containers out there in the snow. They're often near a cheap source of hydroelectric power. So whereas you might pay 10 or 11 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, the cloud data center might get it for 2 cents. And those savings can be passed on to you. We currently have cloud data centers in San Antonio, Texas, and in Chicago, Illinois. Over in Europe, we have Dublin, Ireland, and Amsterdam, and the Netherlands. In Asia, we have Hong Kong and Singapore, and more are on the way. The overall capabilities then are you can run vendor applications in the cloud, such as Microsoft's BPOS CRM offerings or applications from other vendors that are in the cloud. You can host your own business applications in the cloud, store your data in the cloud, secure what you have in the cloud, use the cloud as a relay for communication, and you can sync between what you have in the cloud and your enterprise. So I'd like to talk now about these specific benefits that in the visioning session we want to capture your feedback about. So there's about 12 of them here. The first is elasticity. So think about it yourself. If we were in a room together, I would be asking you to score from zero, no interest, to high interest. How important these are to you. So the first is elasticity. This is the idea of the cloud as a big rubber band. You simply can make your deployment larger, smaller as needed, easily and quickly, whenever you want to. It's what makes the cloud cost effective and gives it this flexibility, and it's easy to do through a portal. Elasticity. Second is no commitment. This is the easy in, easy out nature of the cloud. As I mentioned earlier, there are no financial legal obligations beyond the current month's bill if you're on the month-to-month plan. And it does away with what we've had in the past, where we've had restrictive long-term arrangements for data centers and hosting. And, that era is coming to a close. And here it's all about flexibility and having the freedom to change your direction anytime you want to. Third is reduced costs. So those shared resources in the cloud, is generally going to be cheaper to use. And in some cases, some of our customers, we've seen a 90% reduction in costs. Sometimes it's very, very, very dramatic. The greater efficiency is there, and again, everyone's mileage will vary, but the cloud is certainly worth looking at just because of what the savings we're seeing very often can really make a difference for your bottom line. Consumption-based pricing. This is the metered-based use of the cloud. So you only pay for what you use and only use what you need. So, for example, if you need more service this month, you'll have a higher bill, but if you reduce the smaller number next month, you have a lower bill. Budget storage or own paying for the amount of storage you need to have allocated. Capacity. This is that capacity on tap as much as you need, whenever you need it. You don't have to have any worries about running out of capacity. And you don't, if you think about, some customers out there have a big data center and they lease a second data center just for occasional overflow during peak periods, and they've got to pay a lot of money just to have that data center standing by in case they need it. On the cloud, you don't have that at all. The capacity is there at the moment you need it, and you're not paying to reserve it. I call that just-in-time computing. And so it is a different world. And as I said earlier, there are some new styles of computing that are available to you, such as burst computing. Time to market, faster time to market. So your allocation configuration deploying in the cloud, generally 15 to 20 minutes in the case of the Windows Azure platform. It really is a whole different world from the old days of, well, we have a new application, can we get approval to buy a bunch of servers, and we've got to procure them, and get them configured, and all this calendar time goes by, you're dependent on other people, and here in the cloud, to think is to act. And the agility that comes out of this, it's a very necessary ingredient in corporate agility. And then, you might be just think to yourself, how many times is there a need for your company to turn on a dime and react to some big initiative and execute? And, IT sometimes has to be the long pole and all that, and all that readiness for a new initiative. With the cloud, there's a chance for it to be one of the more nimbler and agile parts of the company. Self-serve computing. So there's no waiting to put things in the cloud. You can do it yourself. Because there's no procurement process, because you don't have to stand in line behind somebody else for priority reasons, because you don't have dependencies on others, you can just do it. And that's pretty interesting. This is that idea I mentioned earlier, the democratization of IT, where more people and more departments can do things themselves. And of course, your IT department needs to be okay with that, and different company cultures are going to react differently to that idea. But It really can make a difference eliminating some of the bottlenecks that otherwise naturally form just because human beings can only do so much. Service level agreement. So in the cloud, we have a general service level agreement that boils down to just a little bit better than 99.9% or 3 nines, which means about up to 8 hours of unavailability in the course of a calendar year, potentially. So you want to think about that because there's some companies that's a step up in availability, and some companies that's a step down, depending on what their current requirements are. Your availability of your applications is protected through having redundant servers. We always recommend to get the SLA in Windows Azure, for example, you need to have at least 2 servers on a farm. They can stay up even during patching. And your data is protected through data redundancy. So, for example, if you write something to write a piece of data in the Windows Azure Cloud Platform, it's not stored once; it's actually stored 3 times in what we call 3 separate fault domains for your protection. Simplify IT. So things like provisioning, configuration, servers, and deployment are all automated. You just ask for these things through a web portal, and they happen. And even something like promoting from a staging environment to a production environment, you might think what that normally involves right now in your company. It's just clicking a button. In the case of Windows Azure, and in less than a minute, your virtual IPs is swapped, and production has become staging, vice versa. Management. So automated management is a big feature of the Microsoft Cloud. It saves on labor costs. Patches are applied automatically, and security patches coming in all the time are automatically applied for you, typically at night. And something like upgrading your application, you just deploy it, say upgrade, and the upgrade happens. The upgrade is sequenced so that your application does not suffer unavailability. The cloud operating system, if you will the fabric, is watching over your server health and taking remedial action. And all this frees up people from drudgery tasks to focus on more strategic work. You can really think of some of your people who do like server configuration can kind of take their jobs up a notch and focus on perhaps more important things. Capital expenditures to operation expenditures. So if you are not buying servers up front, you may be replacing capital expenditures with operational expenditures. For a lot of companies differ on their accounting practices, but for a lot of companies this means a healthier balance sheet and seen as a positive. And again, a style of computing change here. You're getting away from this periodic need to spend a lot of money on hardware, and you're just doing pay-as-you-go monthly billing where things are more even. New capabilities. So the cloud has some new capabilities that we haven't had in the enterprise. One of them is a good way to communicate between organizations using the cloud as a relay. Another is federated security, which potentially supports all the world's security schemes. Easy globalization. We ourselves at Neudesic have put things in the cloud, such as our own internal onboarding and training portal. We put them in the cloud for ease of access, so people didn't have to VPN into our headquarters. And then burst computing, another style of computing the cloud enables. All new capabilities that may give you a reason to want to use the cloud. And then the business model. You may be interested in the new business models are enabled by the cloud. The key one, I think, is the software as a service model that may interest you, where you have single deployment but multiple corporate tenants. And you may find that the fineness of the cloud, it may just better fit your business model than the way on-premise IT is costed out. So these are some of the things that we would go over in the visioning session, and go around the room and ask the people what they think, and see if there's consensus, and find out that maybe there's this much interest in elasticity, maybe people aren't so interested in no commitment, maybe there's a lot of interest to reduce costs, and capture that, perhaps for both business and technical audiences, and find out, the dozen or so potential value points of the cloud, which ones really actually matter to your company. Because we want to focus on that, and want to use that to sort of weight our scoring suitability, and make sure we demonstrate those areas in anything that we produce in the assessment. Now, it wouldn't be too fair to just talk about benefits in a visioning session. We also, really, to do justice, we want to talk about risk. So security and concerns in general always come up in a cloud discussion. And so we have knowledge-based security. Most of the concerns somebody might raise, we typically heard. And one of the big concerns is people are concerned about security, and that's not always very specific concern. Sometimes people say, well, I'm just concerned about security in general. They don't necessarily have something granular we can attack there. So we try to tease out of that specific concerns because they can then be addressed. One of the ones that comes up a lot is worry about my data falling into the wrong hands if I'm using shared resources in the cloud, or what we call a data isolation failure. And I just want to kind of drill into that one in particular and just kind of give you an idea of what we do to make you feel comfortable about designing defenses, something like that. So this one we have an actual threat model. I'm going to put up an attack diagram tree here. But really when somebody's worried about data falling in the wrong hands, well, how can that happen? Well, it can happen accidentally or deliberately. Accidentally, somebody might just set up the right protections in the first place. Perhaps, even though it's remote, the cloud infrastructure could fail to do its job right, enforce things. What happens if a disk drive fails in the cloud and is taken out for repair? Who knows where that goes? Then on the deliberate side, it could be an insider abuse. That could happen potentially at your company. That could happen potentially even at the cloud vendor you're using. Or a hacker might observe data in transmission. So even though the chances of things might be pretty remote, still you might have a pretty aggressive risk management group, and they might just be worried about, gee, this could happen to me. Well, so how do we deal with that? Well, really the concern is not that data falls in the wrong hands. Really the concern is that intelligible data falls in the wrong hands. Well, that's something we can do something about. Before I get into the right side of the tree here, these initial things I mentioned, accidental and deliberate data falling in the wrong hands, they have mitigation, sort of these circles down here. You can do security audits. You can the vendor could have a cloud vendor could have a white policy on disk drives that leave the cloud data center. The ones in green are under your control, but the ones in yellow are under the cloud vendor's control, which means you can only take so much comfort because you can't directly control those things. But now we're up here on the right side of the tree where it's talking about intelligible data falling in the wrong hands. And really the way to resolve that is simply to add your own layer of security above and beyond what the cloud does and encrypt all of the data that you transmit and store. And if you do that, you can do good encryption, and you can protect and rotate your keys. That's all under your control. And so you've really taken a risk that, although it wasn't necessarily a great risk in the first place, you've moved it from unlikely to can't happen by taking control yourself. And so this is an example of what we would do with any concern that you might have, whether it's one in our knowledge base or a new one that we have to map out. This is the process we would use to explore all of the avenues that could lead to any potential downside and design the protections for it. Okay. Well, after doing the visioning, we start to look at your opportunities, which are your applications. Hopefully, out of the envisioning process, or perhaps from our pre-survey, some of your applications have been identified as potentially worth looking at for the cloud. And what we want to do then is profile them and study them. And we're ultimately going to score them on overall suitability and on ROI. In order to do that, we need to learn quite a bit about them. And so we'll start out with each application asking who's using it. Is it accessed by the public, or by consumers, or by businesses, or by employees? How is it accessed? Is it web-based, mobile, desktop, something else? What's the value to the business? And some key questions about life cycle. Is this an application that's already in production? Maybe it's something you're still developing and you might want to steer it to the cloud, or maybe something you're going to create down the road in the future, a new app. And then lifetime. Lifetime is a pretty important question because the number of years that we think the app will be around affects greatly what we think the ROI would be in moving to the cloud. And do you expect any growth during that time? Next up, we would ask you about deployment. We want to know about number of concurrent users and total users. If it's an existing app, we want to know how many servers you're using and server specs. In particular, we're going to see if those servers compare well to one of the sizes we have in the cloud. We're going to ask you how much data you have, database data and non-database data, in terms of gigabytes. We're going to look for your SLA target, and again, if that's more than 3 nines, we may have a non-starter. And if you have any other kind of SLA requirements, such as a recovery time objective, recovery point objective on a data restore, we want to make sure we map that. And we want to know your usage profile. Are we increasing, flat, declining, seasonal, burst, or unknown? Again, that tells us quite a bit about what to expect in terms of cost efficiency. We're looking at platform. We're going to map out very simply what are the software tiers and major software components of your application. That might be a short list, it might be a very long list, but we really want to account for the, if you architecturally drew, sometimes we'll do this diagram of your application on the whiteboard, there's a bunch of boxes, we want to know what those boxes are. We want to know what powers them currently, because we need to figure out what's going to power them in the cloud. So this example here is kind of thin, but only 3 rows, but we will map out your software tiers and components, and we will understand the technologies that drive them currently, and we will map them to what needs to happen in the cloud, and we will assess the degree of change. Maybe they run the same, maybe there's a minor change, maybe there's a major change, and we have to replace a tier completely. We want to do that because that's going to help us do an estimate. In a migration estimate, we will figure out the code, data, security, integration, and operational tasks relating to doing all that work. So we have at least a rough working number. We want that number because we want to be able to do an ROI computation, and we have to take the cost of getting into the cloud into account there. We'll look at total cost of ownership, and we have quite a few different ways we can do that. So first of all, if we are looking at something like BPOS, our questions are how many seats you have, different types of users, like with CRM Online, it's really how many seats you have. In case of Windows Azure, however, we have quite a few things going on here, and I need to ask quite a few questions: how many servers you have, how much database, non-database storage, which of the other services in the cloud you're going to use, and so on. We're going to go into TCO and ROI in our second webcast, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now. But from that, we are going to be able to get an ROI analysis, and that's going to give us the month-to-month differential. What's getting there, and it's going to give us, based on that, the reason we asked that question earlier about how many years of life left in the app is it's going to give us the overall savings over time. So you can see here in this particular example that the actual cost of migration the first year exceeds the savings. However, because the app is believed to be needed for at least 5 years, the savings in the subsequent years actually bring it close to $250,000 in overall savings. And again, in our next webcast, we will go into this in more detail. The other thing we'll look at is technical suitability overall for the cloud. So let's look at savings, but it's going to look at 11 other dimensions and get an overall picture of cloud suitability. We have ways of scoring these different areas here. You see that different apps have different shapes. And there is an ideal shape, which is this umbrella type shape. This is the way that when we come back and present our findings to both technical and non-technical people, that you can understand well that we've considered a lot of different perspectives on suitability, and some of the apps clearly are a better fit than others. And again, in our third part of the podcast, we're going to go into technical suitability in more detail. We will also propose a strategy for you. We may have heard things throughout the day. You may have people in your company who are vehemently against certain types of data ever being in the cloud, and other people who think certain data and applications really belong in the cloud. And whatever that is, we want you to be able to prescribe guidance for your company about guidelines for what belongs in the cloud and what doesn't. We will plot these opportunities that we've profiled on a suitability roadmap. We'll plot basically how much value there is to be gained financially against how easy it is to put in the cloud. So it'll be the magic quadrant is the top right, where applications there are the obvious starting point for you. They're straightforward to do, and they bring the most value. And often there'll be a logical second way behind that. And of course, there may be some applications that are neither valuable nor easy, and we would not recommend pursuing them. I mentioned earlier that we would ask you about what's going on in the business and IT, and here we plot things on a calendar. So business-wise, you might have a new product launch going on. It might be valuable to know when your budgeting for the year is. IT-wise, you might have some new application launching. You might have a server refresh cycle in the works. And for a proof of concept and various cloud projects, we want to plot them logically on a calendar against that backdrop, make sure that everything makes sense. Okay, so that's our walkthrough, and an overview of what a cloud computing assessment from Neudesic for the Microsoft platform looks like. And as I said, we have 2 upcoming webcasts in the months to come that will go into the ROI and technical suitability / migration stories in more detail. At this point, we're open to any questions you might have.
Thanks, Dave, for this awesome presentation. We did have a question come through, and just as a reminder to everyone, to ask a question, please click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. The question we had come through was, is this an assessment developed by Neudesic or a Microsoft assessment delivered by Neudesic?
Great question. So this particular assessment that I've shown you here is something developed by Neudesic. Our assessment is based on us having gotten involved with the cloud very early on, really since 2008, in fact, in the case of Windows Azure. And we have been fortunate enough to get a lot of early field experience, early adopters, and so we developed a very good sense of what works and not an assessment. It is also certainly true that some really good tools and assessment programs are coming out of Microsoft, and our intent is not to ignore those. Those will be blended in with what we're doing as they come out, but we do think we have some distinct value add in our assessments.
Thanks, David. Another question we had was, can you elaborate on the regulatory barriers?
Sure. So when we look at barriers, we look at two types of barriers. First is policy barriers. That might exist already within a company that might prevent something going in the cloud. Regulatory barriers are things from the outside. They may be government or from industry that might prevent things from going into the cloud. And so the case there is to see if anything can be done about that or not. So what are some examples of those things? Well, in some cases, your company or industry might require a certain type of certification that Microsoft or the cloud vendors haven't achieved yet. Microsoft certainly is pursuing certifications very vigorously, but in some cases it requires laws being changed and legislators move slowly. So it's not possible to do all of that overnight. Some of the rules out there around the world are pretty interesting. For example, in a lot of the countries in Europe, the rule is that the data has to remain in the country of the owner. And so even though Microsoft has some great data centers in Ireland and Amsterdam, that might not help somebody in Liechtenstein where the data has to stay in Liechtenstein. So I can imagine that creates some interesting wrinkles on things. One of the things that helps remedy that particular situation is the Windows Azure Appliance, something Microsoft announced in June that will be available next year. That basically lets you take a container of cloud technology and have it on premise. And so for certain governments that have barriers where they can't, they have to keep control of the cloud technology, or for other ISPs, that's very promising to look at around that last example I gave.
Thanks, David. That definitely cleared it up. Another question we had was, how do you see enterprise architecture rationalization and initiatives in process tying into an assessment of this nature?
Yeah. So ultimately, the idea of assessment is to find opportunities that make sense, and having convinced the customer that do make sense, you want to explore them more deeply. When we explore them more deeply, we'll do an architectural design session. That's where we're really getting into the details of how would this thing look like in the cloud. And you do take somewhat different approaches when you're migrating it out to the cloud as opposed to something new for the cloud. When we design something new for the cloud, we have some new capabilities in the cloud that didn't used to exist, and so we look at the architecture pretty freshly. It's not that the whole world has changed, but we have some different options and some different ways of doing things. When we're migrating an application, however, we want to change as little of the application as we can get away with, because we want to keep your migration costs low, because if it's too large, they'll offset the savings you might get. And so two slightly different approaches there. For the most part, the things that are true about the Microsoft best practices and reference architectures and standards, .NET framework, for the most part, they remain true in the cloud. The challenge can be knowing what does need to be different. That's one of the reasons to use, whether it's us or another Microsoft partner for an assessment is part of that, is getting that wisdom up front and making sure you don't go down the wrong path.
Thanks, David. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions and greatly appreciate your feedback. The first question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? Give it a few more seconds. Great, thank you. Please rate the presentation content, excellent, good, or poor. Give it a few more seconds. All right, thank you. Last question, would you like us to schedule a follow-up, yes or no? All right, a few more seconds. Great, thank you. If there are no further questions, we'd like to thank David again for this wonderful presentation. This webcast is a part of our cloud computing series. We'll be hosting our next webcast, as David said earlier, determining TCO and ROI on November 16th. We'll be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available, and we will include more information about this upcoming webcast. If you have any further questions about the webcast, I think we may have one. I've heard that you shouldn't put ERP apps in the cloud.
Well, that's a pretty broad category, enterprise use of planning applications. I don't know of any reason why that whole category should be not put in the cloud. Maybe we should just talk briefly about some reasons not to put something in the cloud. You should not put something in the cloud if you think there's a risk and you can't be convinced otherwise that you're putting something that shouldn't be out there. I talked earlier about our threat mitigation process and all, but ultimately you have to be comfortable with things. One type of app you might not want from the cloud is an app that has a lot of internal integrations. I liken that to trying to extract a teeth with deep roots. It makes it very hard to extract an application like that out of the enterprise and put it in the cloud. You can do it, but it might not be worth the expense. But we certainly don't suggest that every app in the world belongs in the cloud. But I would have a concrete. I wouldn't say, for example, ERP apps don't belong in the cloud. That's way too vague. I would have a more concrete reason, such as there are too many internal integrations, or the company's policy won't allow the data there. I would have something more concrete than that.
Thanks, David. Sorry to throw you a question right at the last minute. That was a great one, though. Thank you. If there are no further questions about this presentation, we will be closing up. If you have any questions, please feel free to email David on the slide that he had up. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. You're now free to disconnect. Thank you.